Story 1. I used to think cemeteries were peaceful places, silent, respectful, maybe even sacred. That's what I believed until the night I visited my father's grave, when I learned that silence can be a lie and that the dead do not always rest quietly. It was early October, one of those nights when the air feels heavier than it should. I had left work late, and for some reason I couldn't shake the pull to visit my father's resting place. He died 3 years ago, and I hadn't been by in months. Guilt twisted somewhere deep inside me. I thought that maybe lighting a candle near his headstone would make me feel better, like I was still keeping a connection. By the time I reached the Old Town Cemetery, the sky had already turned from violet to ink black. The only lights were the flickering lamps near the gate and the soft glow of the caretaker's cabin in the distance. He was an old man named Mr. Hale, usually kind but always cautious. As I passed, he opened his door slightly and called out, "You shouldn't stay here after dark, miss. These grounds aren't for the living once night falls." His voice was strange that evening, shaky and urgent, but not from fear of crime or animals. There was something else in it, something he didn't want to name. I forced a polite smile and said, "I'll only be a few minutes." He frowned but nodded. "Then stay close to the main path, and if you hear breathing, just leave. Don't look back." I wasn't sure if he was joking or being dramatic. Either way, I brushed it off and continued down the path. Fallen leaves crunched under my boots, and somewhere far away, a crow cawed before everything went still again. The graves stood in crooked lines, some tilted with age, some half swallowed by ivy. My father's grave was near the old oak at the back, a spot he would have liked because it felt quiet and shaded. When I reached it, I knelt down and set the small candle in front of his name. The flame shivered as if the wind sighed through the trees, but the air was still. I whispered a few words, the kind people say more for themselves than the dead. Then, without warning, I heard something. Soft at first, like fabric shifting beneath the ground. It was breathing. For a moment, I thought it was my imagination, the air moving through the grass, or maybe an animal burrowing. But then the sound grew steadier, slow inhales, ragged exhales. My body locked in place. I told myself it couldn't be real, but the sound was too clear, too human. It came from beneath my father's grave. I stumbled backward, my heart slamming against my ribs. The soil moved. Just barely, but I saw it. The surface rose and fell in rhythm with that breathing. Then, faintly, came muffled gasps. Words I couldn't make out. My mind screamed to run, but my legs forgot how. "Dad?" The word came out before I could stop it. The breathing hitched, as though responding to me. Then something under the earth slapped against the wooden box of the coffin. Once. Twice. The sound chilled me to my core. The ground around the grave began to tremble. Dirt shifted, grass bent inward, and it wasn't just my father's grave anymore. The breathing was spreading from every direction, soft wheezes, pained grunts, desperate gulps for air, like hundreds of lungs pressing against the soil beneath my feet. Graves were heaving, lifting slightly as if the dead were trying to rise all at once. The sight was terrible and mesmerizing. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I finally turned to flee, but the pathway back had changed. The lampposts had all gone out one by one, swallowed by shadows. In their place, I saw faint shapes standing between the tombstones, figures of dirt and bone rising unsteadily, reaching out with trembling hands. They didn't walk toward me exactly. It was like they were swaying, gasping, searching for breath. The candle at my father's grave flickered wildly, then died. The darkness swallowed everything. The air filled with that horrible sound, dozens, maybe hundreds of voices crying out without words. I covered my ears and ran, not knowing where I was going, stumbling over broken stones and uneven ground. When I finally reached the gate, it was open. Mr. Hale stood under the arch with his lantern, his face pale. He didn't say a word. He just stepped aside as I ran past him, gasping harder than any of the voices in that place. Once I reached my car, I looked back. Through the haze of mist, I saw the light of his lantern moving slowly down the path, back into the cemetery. He hadn't followed me. He was going back inside, back toward the graves that still shifted faintly in the dark. I never returned after that night, but sometimes, when I lie in bed with the window open, I think I hear it again, the faint, steady sound of earth breathing. And when I close my eyes, I can still feel the ground moving beneath me, pulsing like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. Story 2. I never thought a storm could feel so heavy. The rain came down like needles, and the wind howled through the trees as if it were warning us. My family and I were driving home from my grandmother's funeral when the sky turned black and the roads flooded. We had no choice but to pull over near an old war cemetery, the kind with crooked headstones and rusted iron gates. The caretaker's cabin was the only shelter in sight. We knocked on the door, soaked and shivering. After a long pause, it creaked open, and an old man stood there holding a rusted lantern. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in decades. He didn't speak at first, just nodded and let us inside. The cabin was cold, but the lantern gave off a faint warmth. He sat us by the fire and offered tea from a chipped pot. As we warmed ourselves, he began to talk. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried through the silence like a secret. He told us stories about the soldiers buried in the cemetery, how they never left their posts, how they still stood guard in the dark, waiting for orders that would never come. One story chilled me the most. He spoke of a battle that happened exactly 70 years ago on this very night. The soldiers had fought bravely, but the enemy overwhelmed them. Most died where they stood, and the few who survived were buried here, never to see home again. The old man's eyes grew distant as he said, "Some say they still walk these grounds, searching for the ones they lost." My little brother asked, "Do you ever see them?" The lantern keeper smiled faintly. "I see them every night. They come to me, asking for warmth, for company. They're lonely, you see. They don't know they're dead." We stayed until the storm passed, then thanked the man and left. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to thank him again, to ask more about the stories, but when I returned to the cemetery, the caretaker's cabin was empty. The door hung open and the lantern sat cold on the table. I asked the groundskeeper, a younger man who was mowing the lawn, "Where's the old man who lives here?" He looked at me strangely. "There hasn't been a caretaker here for 70 years. The last one died on the anniversary of that battle. The one you're talking about." My blood ran cold. "But I saw him last night. He gave us tea, told us stories." The groundskeeper shook his head. "That's impossible. The old caretaker was buried in the mausoleum over there. He died the same night as the battle." I followed his gaze to a crumbling stone mausoleum at the edge of the cemetery. The door was slightly ajar, and fresh boot prints led from the cabin to the entrance. The prints were wet, as if someone had just walked through the rain. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. The air inside was thick and cold. The lantern sat on a stone shelf, its flame flickering weakly. And there, in the corner, was the old man. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow, and whispered, "You came back. I knew you would." I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The lantern keeper smiled again, and the sound of marching boots echoed from the graves outside. The soldiers were coming, just as he said, and this time, they weren't alone. Story 3. I used to laugh at ghost hunters. You know, those late-night YouTubers with shaky cameras and overacted screams. I thought the paranormal was a joke, something desperate people made up for attention. That was before I became part of the very kind of story I used to mock. before I heard my own voice whispering my secrets from the dark. It started as a dare. My friends and I had a weekend routine. Nothing illegal, just dumb teenage stuff. We recorded challenge videos, explored abandoned houses, tried to go viral. So when Mason suggested filming a ghost hunt in the old Hillcrest Cemetery, I said yes, immediately. It was supposed to be harmless fun. The cemetery was quiet, old, and almost forgotten, perched on a hill that looked over the town like a sleeping giant. We packed cameras, flashlights, and an audio recorder. The plan was to start recording just after midnight. Mason thought ghosts were more active then. We joked about bringing salt and holy water, but none of us really believed it was necessary. It was all for laughs. Or that's what I thought. When we got there, the gate was half broken, ivy coiling through the iron bars. The moonlight spilled across crooked headstones, and the air carried that smell, wet soil and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. We turned on our flashlights and entered. It was me, Mason, his girlfriend Leah, and my best friend Ryan. The more we walked, the quieter it got. Even the crickets had gone silent. For a long stretch, the only sound was the crunch of our shoes on gravel and the faint static of Mason's recorder. Then, just as we stopped near a row of old graves, we heard it. Our voices. It started faint, like someone whispering from the far end of the cemetery. Only the words were wrong. It wasn't random murmuring, it was familiar. The voice mimicked Mason, his tone, his rhythm. "Come closer," it whispered, dragging the words out like they hurt to speak. We stood frozen. Mason looked at us, half expecting one of us to admit we were messing around, but no one laughed. When I turned toward the sound, another whisper joined in, softer but unmistakable. It was mine. "Eli knows what he did," the voice said from the darkness. Cold rushed through me like ice water. My flashlight trembled in my hand. No one else knew what that voice meant. It was something private, something I'd never told anyone, not my friends, not even my parents. "What the hell was that?" Leah whispered. Ryan tried to sound calm. "Maybe there's a speaker out here or something. Someone's pranking us." But when he said it, another whisper answered, copying his exact words, the same tone, the same breathlessness. "Maybe there's a speaker out here or something." The whisper didn't sound behind us. It came from everywhere, carried on the wind, curling between graves and trees. Then came laughter. Ours. Quiet and broken, like echoes that didn't know how to end. The more we talked, the more the cemetery talked back. At first, I thought maybe we'd picked up distant audio feedback. But then, the whispers started saying things no one else could know. They repeated thoughts I hadn't spoken aloud. Guilt, anger, fear. All the things I kept buried. Mason shouted, "Stop it! Whoever's out there, come out!" The reply came instantly, his exact voice whispering, "Stop it! Stop it!" Over and over, faster and faster, until the words blurred into static. Then silence. He took a shaky step forward. The air felt colder. Even the flashlight beams seemed thinner, weaker against the dark. That's when the whispers turned into pleading voices, crying softly, whispering our names, begging for help. I wanted to leave, but Mason's stubbornness got the better of him. "I'm not scared," he muttered, lifting the recorder. "Say something again." His challenge hung in the air. Then, faintly, the whispers breathed his name. "Mason." It sounded like a prayer and a warning at once, and he made the biggest mistake of all. He answered. "Yes," he said, before any of us could stop him. The second the word left his mouth, all sound vanished. Then, with a horrible gasp, Mason dropped to his knees. His flashlight rolled away, its beam cutting across the uneven graves. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. I grabbed his shoulders. His skin was cold, his eyes wide and empty. Then the whispers returned. But this time I recognized the new voice in the chorus. It was Mason. He was whispering from everywhere, from the grass, from the stones, from the ground itself. We ran. None of us looked back. Leah screamed for him until her voice broke, but his whisper kept fading further, blending into the rest, hundreds of voices murmuring secrets from beneath the earth. When we reached the gate, Ryan turned back once. He swore he saw shadows moving between the graves, figures that looked almost human, but hollow, whispering with mouths that didn't move. The police found nothing, just an empty cemetery and one voice recorder that still worked. When they played it, the tape was filled with whispers, layer after layer, including ours, and Mason's voice asking, "Do you hear me now?" That was 3 weeks ago. I thought it would fade, the sound, the fear. But last night, lying awake, I swore I heard the whispers again. Not online, not in a dream, outside my window. And this time, the voice that spoke first wasn't Mason's. It was mine. Story 4. I once thought angels only brought comfort. Statues, paintings, prayers. They all made me believe that angels protected us. But I don't believe that anymore. Not after the day my son met the one that moved when no one was looking. It happened 6 months after my husband, Adam, passed away. Ethan was 9, quiet and kind, but the grief cut deep into both of us. He stopped laughing, stopped wanting to go outside. I thought visiting the cemetery might help him understand where his father was resting, help us both find peace. The cemetery was old but famous. Rows of marble angels stood over the graves, each carved differently, some weeping, some with open wings. There was a strange beauty in the silence of that place. The caretaker said artists from all over Europe had sculpted them in the 1800s. Ethan seemed fascinated as soon as we entered. His eyes followed every statue we passed. The air was still. Even the birds avoided singing there. We found Adam's grave under a tall willow tree. I knelt and polished the marker while Ethan wandered a few feet away, his tiny hand dragging through the grass. When I looked up to call him, he was staring at one of the marble angels, one that stood taller than me, with one hand reaching forward as if offering a blessing. "Mom," he said without turning to me. "Did it just move?" I laughed softly. "It's a statue, sweetie. It can't move." He glanced away, frowning, and then whipped his head back again. "I swear it did. The hand, it was down, and now it's up." I frowned, studying the statue. Its right arm was outstretched, palm open, wings wide. Nothing strange. Probably his imagination, I thought. Grief made children see things to fill the silence adults left. But just for a second, as I stood up and turned toward the car, I felt it. That flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. The angel's hand. It seemed ever so slightly higher than before. We left soon after. Ethan stayed quiet on the ride home. That night, he asked me not to turn off the hallway nightlight. I told him it was fine, that angels protect little boys. I regret saying that now. 2 days passed. Life went back to its dull rhythm. Then, one morning, Ethan came into my room early, pale and shaken. "Mom," he said in a whisper, "there's dirt under my nails. I don't know how it got there." He showed me his small hands, dark soil pressed deep beneath the edges of his nails. I thought maybe he'd sleepwalked or scratched at a potted plant, but I cleaned them and said nothing more. He needed rest, not reprimands. That night, I woke up hearing the sound of scratching, a soft, steady sound from Ethan's room. I walked in to find him sitting upright on his bed, eyes open, but not awake. His head turned slowly toward me. Something small and gray glinted beside him, a tiny flake of stone. I brushed it away and shook him gently. His eyes fluttered open. "Was I sleepwalking again?" he asked, voice trembling. I nodded, lying to both of us. By the fourth night, he started crying in his sleep, mumbling words I couldn't understand, something about the angel calling. The bedclothes were gritty, soil everywhere. My heart broke with fear. I decided we needed to go back to the cemetery to show him the statue was just stone, harmless. The morning sky was flat gray when we arrived. The caretaker wasn't there, but the gate stood open. Ethan clutched my hand tightly as we walked along the familiar path. Everything looked different, darker, maybe smaller. We reached the angel he had fixated on. This time, its arm was not raised. It was pointing down, pointing at the ground in front of it. I froze. The air turned cold and heavy, and branches swayed though no wind blew. Ethan tugged my sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "it's looking at us." The statue's face tilted ever so slightly downward. Its marble eyes, once serene, now seemed sharp. I stumbled backward, dragging Ethan with me. My mind screamed to leave, to run, but Ethan pulled free and stepped forward. He reached out, placing his hand on the angel's cold stone foot. "Ethan, don't!" I shouted. The ground beneath the statue shuddered like something alive. The soil caved slightly inward as though breathing. I grabbed Ethan and we ran, blindly, breathlessly, until we were out of that place. That night, he didn't sleep at all. He sat up, staring at the window, saying he could hear her calling again. The next morning, he didn't wake up. He was simply gone. His bed was smeared with soil, tiny white flecks scattered across his sheet. The police said he must have wandered off. I knew better. I went back to the cemetery alone. Rain fell hard, soaking the earth until it clung to my shoes. The angel stood in its same place, hands folded now against its chest. Beneath it, something new caught my eye, the wet shimmer of a freshly carved stone marker. I knelt, my body shaking. It took me a moment to read the name. Ethan Caldwell, beloved son, born 2015, died 2024. The date was today. And above his name, carved into marble so white it almost glowed, rested the angel's lowered hand, its fingertip pressing gently against the soil, as if to keep what was beneath from rising. Story 5. There are moments that divide your life into before and after. For me, that moment came on a cold, moonless night when I drove past an abandoned cemetery and saw my own funeral taking place. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't dreaming, but I wish I had been. It was past midnight, and I was driving home from a late shift at work. The road was narrow and cut through a stretch of countryside that everyone in town avoided after dark. No streetlights, no houses, just miles of empty land and the faint hum of my old car engine. I only took that route because the highway was blocked by construction. A few miles in, the fog began to thicken. It rolled across the road like waves of smoke, and soon the world beyond my headlights disappeared completely. I slowed down, gripping the wheel tighter, trying to see through the gray curtain. That's when I noticed faint lights moving on the left side of the road. At first, I thought they were flashlights or maybe someone having a midnight vigil. But the lights weren't white. They were golden, flickering softly like candles. Dozens of them. I squinted through the fog and saw something I'll never forget. A procession. Men and women dressed in black, walking slowly through the gates of the old Hollow Grove Cemetery. Some carried candles, others held umbrellas even though no rain fell. At the center of the group, 6 shadowed figures carried a coffin, old-fashioned, polished, and gleaming darkly under the candle's weak glow. The cemetery had been abandoned for years. I remembered the local stories about ghost sightings, about the caretaker who vanished one winter night. My curiosity, foolish as ever, won over common sense. I pulled my car to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and stepped out. The air was colder than I expected, sharp enough to bite through my jacket. The procession moved deeper into the cemetery, their faint chanting carried by the wind. I followed quietly, telling myself I just wanted a better look. Maybe it was some strange tradition, or maybe someone was filming a movie. The old iron gate creaked as I squeezed through. Inside, the world felt wrong. The fog didn't hang in the air. It clung to the gravestones, curling around them like hands. The candlelight painted the mourners' faces in pale yellow, but their expressions didn't change. Not sorrowful, not even human. Just calm, cold stillness. I crouched behind a large headstone at the edge of the group, heart hammering in my chest. My breath fogged in the air, and I tried not to make a sound. The pallbearers lowered the casket into an open grave with slow, deliberate movements. The chanting stopped. Then the figure at the front, the one holding the largest candle, turned slightly, as if addressing the gathered crowd. The voice was quiet, nearly a whisper, yet it reached me clearly through the thick air. "He has arrived." I frowned, confused. He who? I peeked over the gravestone, and that's when my heart froze solid. The candlelight flickered across the coffin lid, illuminating fresh, clean carvings. My name was engraved there, my full name, even my date of birth. And below it, a date that hadn't come yet. Tonight. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the wet grass. The sound echoed through the silence like a shot. Instantly, every head turned toward me in unison. Dozens of faces, pale, sunken, their eyes too dark and deep. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They only watched. Panic flooded me. I bolted toward the gate, my shoes sliding in the mud. The fog seemed thicker now, rising from the ground like smoke from a fire. I forced my way through it until I reached the road again. My lungs burned as I stumbled toward my car, fumbling for the keys. I started the engine, heart racing, and sped away without looking back. But after a few minutes of driving, something felt wrong. The fog never faded. The trees on either side of the road looked the same. Then, up ahead, I saw a familiar iron gate. I slowed down, disbelief prickling through me. The Hollow Grove Cemetery. I was back. I turned the car around, drove faster, headlights slicing through the mist. But no matter how far I went, every fork in the road, every turn, looped me back to the same spot, those rusted gates and that waiting grave. I jumped out, shouting into the night, "What do you want from me?" My voice echoed, but so did something else. From deep inside the cemetery, the same chant started again. Soft at first, then louder, until I could distinguish 100 voices repeating the same word. My name. I ran. Through the fog, through the rows of stones, back toward the open grave. The mourners still stood there, motionless, the coffin gleaming with condensation. The spotlights of candlelight reflected off the still surface like it was waiting for me to complete something left unfinished. And then I saw movement. The lid of the coffin creaked open, slowly, carefully. Inside, a body lay perfectly still. Mine. The same clothes, the same face, pale and lifeless. My heart stopped beating for a second. My mind screamed for reason, but none came. The figure holding the largest candle stepped forward again and spoke softly, almost kindly. "We've been waiting for you." The crowd's faces lifted together, expressionless, expectant. Their hands reached out lightly toward me, not grabbing, just guiding, as if I was the final part of their ritual. I stumbled backward, turned, ran, but every path I took bent me back to the same grave, the same coffin, the same open arms of the dead. The last thing I remember before the darkness swallowed everything was the flicker of candlelight reflecting off the brass plate on the coffin, my name shining brighter than any flame. And now, when people drive past that abandoned cemetery at night, they sometimes notice a man standing behind a grave, watching a candlelit procession. Always the same man, always waiting to see who's next. Story 6. Some places make you feel seen even when you're alone, not in the comforting way, more like something is quietly watching, waiting to write you down. I didn't believe in that feeling until I met the caretaker who kept every visitor's name, even the ones not meant to stay. I'm a genealogist by trade. I trace bloodlines, collect names, piece together family legacies for people who want to know where they come from. It sounds dull to most, but to me, it's like chasing ghosts made of paper and ink. 2 months ago, I got a commission from a client who wanted me to find documentation of her ancestors buried in a remote mountain cemetery called St. Valor's Rest. She said the local records were inconsistent, that many older graves had no dates or markings. It was remote, miles away from any village, but I've worked in worse places. The road was a nightmare. It wound between sheer cliffs and forests so dense my GPS cut out halfway through. By the time I reached the cemetery gates, the sun had already started to dip behind the jagged ridgeline. The gate was open even though no one was around to unlock it. As I walked through, the air changed. It wasn't just colder. It was still in a way nature never is. Not a leaf moved. Not a single sound, besides gravel crunching under my boots. The iron gate closed behind me with a sound that seemed too final. The caretaker appeared as if he had been waiting all along. An old man, tall but stooped, with thin white hair and a dusty gray coat. He said nothing for several seconds, just regarded me with eyes that felt too steady, too aware. "You're looking for names," he said, his voice dry and calm. "Yes," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Family records. I'm tracing a lineage." He smiled faintly, and the hollow of his cheeks deepened. "Then you've come to the right place. I keep all names remembered." He gestured toward a small wooden cabin near the tree line. Inside, shelves lined with ledgers filled the room. Candles flickered weakly on a long wooden table. The smell of old paper and candle wax thickened the air. He handed me a stool and told me to take my time. As I copied inscriptions from the nearest rows of graves, I noticed he was writing in a large black ledger of his own. Every few minutes, he paused, dipped his pen in ink, and quietly murmured a name before recording it in a neat, ancient script. I joked nervously. "That's quite a system you have there, keeping everyone listed like that." He didn't look up. "Names are important. Once they're lost, so are the souls that carried them." I kept working while the sun sank lower, the forest outside swallowing the light completely. My flashlight flickered across headstones with dates spanning centuries. But I noticed something strange. The older the grave, the deeper the name etched in stone, as if someone kept returning to make sure it would never fade. It was nearly dark when I saw him write again. This time I caught the name clearly. It was mine. I froze. He finished the line neatly, closed the ledger halfway, and gave me a faint, knowing smile. "Cataloging the living too?" I asked, forcing a laugh. His look was unreadable. "Everyone who enters must be remembered. It would be a shame to forget you, wouldn't it?" My throat tightened. I leaned closer under the pretense of checking his handwriting, but my eyes darted down the page. Every name on that list had a date beside it, but none of the dates were in the past. They were all set for the days, weeks, and years ahead. Future dates, every single one marked for death, and beside each name was a row number, grave numbers. I scanned the ledger frantically until I found what I feared, my own name. The date beside it, for that very night. A small scrawled note followed, Plot 47, Western Hill. Panic took hold. I stepped back, my breathing shallow. "This isn't funny," I said, half yelling. "Is this some kind of joke for tourists?" He didn't move from his chair. "There are no tourists here, only arrivals." The air seemed thicker now, like the room was closing in. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, but when I stepped outside, the cemetery looked different. The path that should have led back to the gate wound somewhere new. Every direction pointed me deeper inside. I ran. My flashlight beam shook as I passed gravestones too quickly to read, until I tripped on something and fell hard to the ground. When I looked up, my stomach dropped. Before me stood a mound of freshly turned soil. A new grave. The marker at its head was already in place. The inscription, clean and sharp. My name, my birth date, and the same death date from the caretaker's ledger, tonight. Behind me, boots crunched on gravel. His voice slid quietly through the dark. Plot 47, right where you belong. I scrambled up and ran, slipping on wet leaves. I don't know how long or how far. Eventually, the fog opened into the mountain road again, and I nearly collapsed as I reached my car. When I looked back, the cemetery gate was open, just as I'd found it. I drove until dawn, too scared to stop. When I finally reached town, I turned on the local news radio to ground myself. The announcer's calm voice filled the silence. Authorities have located a car at the foot of Mount St. Valor. Police confirm the driver lost control late last night and did not survive. My hands trembled. The car's make and model were mine. So was the license plate, and in the reflection of my rearview mirror, the caretaker sat quietly in the back seat, holding his black ledger open to a fresh page. For more stories like this, share and subscribe. Goofy Horror.